So, this one is another of the 4 random books ones, which I think are going to be quite a common theme in this. I think next time I do this, I'll exclude 4 random books from it. So there'll be 5 which aren't either the two books or 4 random books. But the 4 random books I kept going for a long time. I like that series. I'd like to bring back that series at some point. Try and do it in a way which engages the audience more, because obviously they didn't. Some of them really did. Some of them are in my top 20, top 30 videos of all time, and yet there's quite a few which are in the bottom 50. I'm not sure why.
Hello and welcome to episode 30 of...
My hair was so thick during COVID. I seriously, without being able to cut my own hair, it just got longer and longer and longer until I learned to cut it myself.
4 Random Books. Episode 30 of 4 Random Books. And I am recording this, believe it or not, on the 7th of September 2020. And this is coming out in March.
I recorded a whole lot of them. A whole slew of them.
So, episode 30. Whatever will we discuss in episode 30? Well, courage and personal accounts. That's what today's theme is. That's what this episode's theme is. This lovely book, In Foreign Fields, compiled by Dan Collins. Heroes of Iraq and Afghanistan in their own words. It's a lovely book for that thing. It's got pictures in. As you know, I do love a nice picture. Especially when they involve canines.
It is good when you have a nice picture and they involve canines. And again, I am hunting this one, because this was a very, very cool one I used to have. An Iron Brew anchor. A canny anchor. Definitely a canny anchor, that one.
Glad to hear that doggy is now living in the UK nice and safely.
Seriously, that is important. I'm not going to say why this to me, but I was watching a program the other night about Shackleton and Scott, and it's about their their Antarctic, their Antarctic expeditions. And honestly, the fact that Shackleton took horses with him, that he was not only planning on using to provide motive power, but was also eating and was feeding the dogs when they died to the other dogs as a source of food, made me start rooting for the Antarctic quite heavily. I mean, I was impressed by their distance and the decisions he took and the leadership decisions, but for the sake of the animals, I was honestly rooting for the Antarctic to win. Occasionally one does find that in history. One finds himself rooting for the ocean. Come on, ocean, you can do this! Come on, Antarctic, freeze them! What can I say? You hurt dogs, I don't like you.
It was always possible that they had arranged it to detonate if it was disturbed, so I worked quite slowly, photographing everything as I went. At the back of the thing I found 15.5 meters of coil detonating cord, which was a good moment. They had used exactly the same thing in the bomb which killed Corporal Brackenbury. So we knew we were onto our man. That cord is highly dangerous stuff. It's crush sensitive. It can function if you drop something on it, or cut it with pliers. The IED, it transpired, was a professionally manufactured and highly sophisticated explosive form projectile device controlled by complex sensor and telemetry modules. We finally finished taking everything apart and bragging it up for further analysis by 8:30 p.m. It was a great example of teamwork, from the youngest squaddy in the warrior spotting the thing, to me, and then to the highest level of forensic science. Getting it out in one piece helped enormously with the development of countermeasures, so it was obviously very satisfying. Anything we can do in our trade that can help protect the soldiers on the ground, that is the greatest feeling. We are protecting the guys who, in turn, protect us when we are on the ground. Tragically, shortly afterwards, Second Lieutenant Richard Shearer was himself to die in a roadside bomb along with Private Leon Spicer and Philip Hewitt. He and Private Spicer were 26 years old, Private Hewitt just 21. That was an enormous blow, the worst day of our tour. I had got to know Richard. He was becoming a friend and was a very popular guy. He had a habit of locating IEDs. Some of them were falsies, and we would tease him for it. I can't believe you got me out of bed for this, Rich. But most often he was spot on the money. A very good soldier, as were the two privates, and an excellent young officer. The team got to know him and got to know his call sign. It's horrible, awful when we got to had to go out to the device which killed him. Going out to Iraq and doing this job, things like Richard Shearer and the other blokes dying, it makes you think. I don't like hearing people have a go at soldiers for doing their job. That is very frustrating. Some people don't like what we do. Maybe they don't like us being in Iraq. Well, I'd rather they kept it to themselves. I think we're doing a good job out there, and the people who criticise often have very little idea what guys are going through. They never will. I don't have flashbacks or bad dreams or anything. It helps being around people who've seen what you've seen. My other half is an ex-traffic copper, so I can talk to her too. She's seen some pretty bad things. I had one bad moment when I was out in theatre. I happened to see somebody else's job pictures, and I suddenly smelt the blood, the explosives. It's an indescribable smell, metallic, cloying, horrible. That was from seeing the aftermath of on a monitor. My outlook on things is pretty fatalistic now. I'd say that was one change me. It's either your time or isn't. You can do everything you possibly can to protect yourself, but what we all are doing is inherently dangerous, and whether it's luck, your time, whenever you want to call it, you can do everything right and still get killed, or you can have a lucky miss.
It is. The more you're exposed to this sort of history, the more you're exposed to any real history, the more you do develop an idea that, honestly, do the best you can, but nothing is foolproof, and the world happens. Life happens. For want of a better phrase, ship happens.
In Foreign Fields by Dan Collins.
It's a good book.
3rd Commando Brigade, Helmand Assault, Ewan Sotheby Taylor. Now, most people know I talk about Michael Clapp more often than Ewan Sotheby Taylor, but he was, of course, the second author who helped Michael Clapp compile his book, Amphibious Assault Falklands. He is a Falklands veteran himself. He was in charge of the landing craft deployed, and yeah, he is a really, really good guy.
And he's gone on after the Falklands to write a whole slew of books, etc. He is very good at history, he's very good at current affairs. He really goes in depth, and of course, because he's been there himself in not just the Falklands but other situations and had similar experiences, he uses that experience to help him ask the right questions to elicit the information, or rather, to approach the conversation the right way. And often that's not asking questions. Often that's simply listening, getting them. Often asking questions and some of these things. This is something you learn in oral history, and you learn when doing these sort of works. Doing oral history, etc., and recording things. Sometimes the worst thing you can do is actually ask questions. Really, really worst thing you can do is ask questions. Because that will break up the flow of their conversation and their thinking.
Smith held his confirmatory orders group at Argyll on the 16th of December, during which he explained his deception plan prior to the assault on Zangon and Calais. So this plan to put the Prince of Wales Royal Regiment's Reconnaissance Platoon and the L Company forward, to be followed by a J Company, while leaving the CO-42 commander, Charlie Stickand, and with K Company and the Commando Reconnaissance Force to continue securing the southern checkpoints. He used the Estonians to secure Chari-Angier, having feinted towards Zargun-Calais. That night he ordered the Princess of Wales Royal Regiment Reconnaissance Platoon in their scimitars to feint a recce north of the Syrian Calais towards Chazimeza, hoping to give
Interesting enough, the Princess of Wales Royal Regiment is actually the local regiment for me in Surrey. It used to be, we used to be sort of the East Surreys, etc. But they got folded into by the folding in of the cap badges into the Princess of Wales Royal Regiment. And so that's the local regiment. That's the regiment which Epsom, Ewell, and various places are affiliated with. And yeah, I had an interesting time courtesy of that regiment. It was not in terms of I organised a few events in my time, some fundraisers, etc., to support them, and they were always very nice people, very helpful people when they came along.
the Taliban that was the primary direction of his advance. Once the fate had been made, Smith ordered the recce platoon to then provide overwatch along the final route to Zargun-Calais. At 03:30, shortly after the recce platoon left, J Company began their.
Also say at this point, I realise I really have been developing my grandfather's hairstyle for a long time, because he retained thick around the edges for his entire life, right until he was late 90s when in 98 when he went on, he passed on, and yeah. But when I looked at it, I just go, yeah, I've always been slightly thin on the centre on top. Thank you, Grandpa. It really is your if you're a male watching this video, it really is your grandfather's hairstyle you've got, okay? Grandfather on your mother's side. 99 times out of 100, that's the hair you're going to inherit.
Move to the expected battle via a forming up position just north of Lugibach. Despite, perhaps because of, the low-key response to the latter stages of the securing of Shin-Calais, the Taliban had been expected to respond in some way. Sure enough, they had done just that, occupying and fortifying a line of compounds running north of Shin-Calais and Nadir al, which would have to be cleared or bypassed. There was an added complication too, which further showed the ISAF expectation of a warm welcome to becoming true. To prevent wheeled movement, the enemy had dug ditches all across all the roads and tracks that led to Zargun-Calais from the south. Tedious and time-consuming, this was an entirely unexpected happening, and meant that one light and one medium-wheeled tractor would now have to be brought up to fill them. The men of the battle group had known that during the approach to Zargun-Calais they could face a 360-degree battle. This, however, would suit them, as they knew that positional battles were more easily won against the Taliban, who, it had been long acknowledged, were in fact at their most dangerous when they popped up unexpectedly. Smith was also keen.
It's an interesting point to remember and sort of think about in the sort of the long war that did happen in terms of counterinsurgency, etc., in Afghanistan and Iraq. A lot of experience was gained in fighting ambush opponents. But again, it's been a universal thing through history that armies which focus on ambush warfare and are best at sort of those sort of skirmish attacks tend to have problems when they are caught in a straight up conventional battle, i.e. one where almost a pitched battle. Mainly because their strengths are in manoeuvre and adaptation and using the terrain to dodge. And in a straight up confrontation, you can't do those things, because usually the terrain, etc., doesn't suit that sort of thing. And that's why you don't want to be caught in those places.
Keen to use the Estonians. Their mechanized infantry had a fine reputation under command of the aptly named Major Rigol, a stern, self-contained man. Smith went to meet him to explain his plan, asked if it was within the Estonians' capabilities, and wondered how Rigor felt about it all. Rigor had replied in the affirmative with as few words as possible. The Estonians needed no more direction than a United Kingdom infantry company, as they were highly respected for being impressively professional. Once told what to do, they did it. Smith was a mortar admirer. In the close areas of the green zone and with the loosely scattered compounds, the 60mm mortar was extremely useful, and the Estonians' mortars were to be particularly effective supporting L Company at Yellow 4, when the foreign mortars were firing across the battle space supporting a British company, having had little or no cross-training about their standard operating procedures. This is a cool book.
Benefits of NATO are going on there, of course. Estonia is a well-regarded NATO member and has been for many years, in that these forces could interoperate and work together. But also, it's an interesting point. I have to say, some of these accounts about Estonian forces and other forces involved in, in the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, etc. You get an interesting narrative emerge of a very, very solid professional forces. And it's kind of anecdotal information coming in, but it gives you a sort of idea of, okay, so what has been feeding in? Why are these forces quite so focused, quite so as heavily trained as and heavily prepared as they are? And you sort of look at their situation, their geographic situation, and go, that makes sense. But it's information like this allows us to feed into and consider what we're dealing with when we're dealing with the wider context of any situations. When we're looking into the wider context of Finland or Sweden, etc., and their security needs, and the Baltic states, it's good to be able to draw on sources like this, which are, in many ways, as close as we can get to first-hand accounts of their operations, of their capabilities, which were easily accessible in English, which, this sounds terrible, but for all the good points and bad points, English is a fairly common lingua franca. Which I do love the fact that lingua franca, I do love where it comes from, what it means, but basically it's a common enough dialect, enough people read it, that you will have a wider audience for your words in a sort of a wider part of in a wider sort of world scene.
But that leads us rather nicely into the Falklands itself, and this is Above All Courage, compiled by Max Arthur. Personal stories from the Falklands War.
I have to say, some of the books like this I find from the Falklands War I do have problems with, because I read them, and I guess the Falklands War is one of the wars I focus on. And it's a very small amount of naval sources, considering the large amount of navy which is there and what they're getting up to. It's a very small amount of naval sources, and that's because, in many ways, if you spoke to the people who are compiling it, they're going, well, yeah, but courage of, we thought we might get bombed, we didn't get bombed, we were machine gunning, doesn't really sell. We were firing guns and missiles at aircrafts that went past. It doesn't sound brave. It is brave, but it doesn't leap off the page. And I can give you if you think about that, if you are reading these books and drawing all your analysis, let's say you pick up that book or a couple of books like it, and you're drawing your understanding of conflict, of war, from such a book, and you've got these pages and pages of accounts of bravery which are all about the ground force involved, you can end up with a very skewed idea of what the naval forces are doing. And considering some of the questions which occasionally pop up on Quora and various other places on Reddit, etc., suggesting various things about Royal Navy performance in the Falklands War, I wonder if the ones who are asking those questions in good faith, because I do have question about whether the quality of good faith on some of them, I wonder if some is because of the sources they've been reading, which focus on the elan, the bravery, and it is brave. And this is the point. I'm not saying the ground forces were not brave. They really are brave. they're doing some amazing things. But because they're doing the more Hollywood, visually impressive bravery, rather than the different kind of bravery you get in terms of you're on a ship which is coming under constant air attack, you're responding, you're supporting forces, etc. But you're not charging at the enemy because there's no enemy for you to charge at. You're basically holding your position. It doesn't really come across the same. Anyway, the book is interesting.
Let's see. Nurse Jackie Hayward, Queen Alexandra's Royal Naval Nursing Service. I was on nights in the intensive care unit at Haslar Royal Navy Hospital when they told me I was going to the Falklands on Sunday. This was Friday night. But I got my things together because I volunteered and I wanted to go. My husband, who was in 4-2 Commando, was already down there. He later got a message from the matron to say that I'd arrived on the Uganda. We were flown in an uncomfortable Hercules from Bryce Norton out to Uruguay, and were met at the airport by armed guards and searched on the plane. It was then that it would hit us.
Can you imagine that husband's emotions hearing his wife is now on aboard the SS Uganda hospital ship and going, and it's not a case of, you're here, you're so close, I'd like to see you, but the only way I can come see you is if I get horribly hurt, and I'd rather that not happen. You know, or there again, considering he's a Royal Marine, he's probably trying to figure out, can I hijack a boat? LZVB VP, what can I hijack to go and see her? Possibly. That's entirely my own interpretation is based on Royal Marines I have known and met. He might not have had any of those ideas.
Us that we were going to war. We had a police escort through the town and everyone stopped and stared at us. We joined a small hospital ship, but the captain didn't know anything about us. He thought he was getting 13 males, which is what he'd asked for on the signal. Instead, he got 3 females. We were soon transferred by helicopter to Uganda, which was very exciting and became the first female nurses to be on the ship since the last World War.
It's kind of interesting that the captain thought he was getting male nurses because there weren't really many of them going around at that point in terms of the various services, etc. In fact, there hadn't been for a long time. It's one of those things that case of even today, and I've had the pleasure to spend a lot of time alongside female salesmen, sort of seeing them in work and talking with them and teaching some of them and etc. in some scenarios over many years. I think, oh good lord, well I was before even GCSE age, so yeah, well over 2 decades, and they're always been incredibly professional and incredibly capable. And the question always in my mind has been, well, the modern roles, they're more and more about what's up here than anything else. It's more and more about your capabilities up here, your mental capabilities, in terms of how you can do these things. It used to be a lot about physicality, in which case you needed the hefty dose of pack mule. But that sort of goes away once you're dealing with, okay, what are you doing? We're maintaining and fixing small drones, etc., or the helicopters, or we're sorting out these, or we're keeping these components going and those components going. And going, right then, what kind of percentage of population are actually going to have the skills and aptitude to do this? The percentage of the population. You don't want to reduce your pool any further by going, we're only going to take one of the genders. You need both. Especially when you consider, just put this out there, we all have that one friend who thinks they're very good at something, and they're really not. We do have that one friend who thinks they'd be very apt for a certain thing, but actually, no. It's like, don't take this the wrong way, but I know what mine is. I think I would make an amazing basketball player because I've always loved playing basketball. But every year for the last 2 summers, I have played basketball during summer school with the kids. And one of my colleague, my usual senior course assistant, the uni student who comes along, actually plays basketball semi-professionally for his uni. And he beats me every time, smashes me completely. I might as well not be anywhere on there. It's that bad. And that reminds me why I am not a professional basketball player. Because as good as I might dream of being, and as good as I might talk myself up to be in my mind when I think about it, the moment I actually play with someone who is actually any good at it, I'm not there. So what matters most when you're putting these things together is having the skilled people, skilled nurses, the skilled engineers. Nothing else really matters. And also, it's always fun. This is usually the point at which occasionally people comment, even on my channel, about, women aren't good engineers. My sister, PhD, civil engineering, geotechnical engineer, chartered all sorts of things. Really, really qualified, really great engineer. Absolutely amazing engineer. I have seen her work in her field of engineering. So basically, that's just shot down the moment it appears, because I've got that in my family as that such a close familial relationship as a sort of example in my head.
We met up with the Uganda at the Red Cross box, which was an agreed safe area, somewhere in the middle of the ocean. During the day, we went into the Falkland Sound and took out casualties, but at night we had to go back and rendezvous in this Red Cross box with the other ships. We got onto Uganda after Goose Green, and before the other major battles. When I arrived, I was told I was going to work on the intensive care unit. I'd worked on the intensive care unit at Haslar, but only for 3 weeks, during which time I hadn't actually got any patients. But at least
Only a small problem. You had the training. But this is also one of the reasons why post Falklands War, and especially with the modern conflict, etc., they have been moving to integrate the military and military medical personnel into the NHS, into NHS hospitals. So they get the experience, so they have the ongoing medical experience. They're useful for the hospitals in terms of they get some really, really good staff, really motivated, really well trained staff. They are good for them. Good for them because they get experience. They can have continued experience of dealing with trauma, dealing with the situations you have in critical care, and that's all good. The small problems that come back is when the deployment starts to take place, and then the NHS trusts sometimes get a bit. But you're taking our best doctors and nurses away from us. Yes, but they were never yours to begin with. Ministry of Defence sort of manically laughing in the background into the minds of the trust, but that's always reality. They're always alone, never a gift.
I had become familiar with the machinery, which was a big help. The first day on board, we were told to find our way about the ship. I'd never been on a big ship before, and I was seasick, but not bad enough to keep me in bed all the time. I kept thinking about my puppy, which I had left with a neighbour. We were told to report to the ward. It was set in the different watches, and
Joys of deployments. Both husbands off in 4-2 Commando, wife now on board SS Uganda, puppy with neighbour. Puppy probably not happy about this, but puppy safe.
we started working 4 hours on and 4 hours off. Then, when we got lots of patients, things became too hectic and we got called back. Casualties were coming in too quick for a normal routine. They tried 6 hours off and 4 hours on, but in the end we did 4 hours on and 8 hours off because we were getting so tired. When I actually started in intensive care, there was only one patient who was a Marine. The rest were on the other wards.
Remember, Uganda is not a dedicated hospital ship. She's a converted liner. That's... Hospital ships are very useful assets. But one of the things they tend to have, and that's often forgotten about when you're converting a ship, is they tend to have a lot more space for the medical personnel to orientate themselves. Sounds strange, but let's put it this way. The hospital ships in warships are basically large functioning accident emergency units, critical care units. They are not like a normal hospital in that they've taken the most hectic, most intense portion of a hospital, and that is the entire thing. And then you add on that you are sleeping in the basically in the same building, in the ship. So you are literally, your commute is from where you're sleeping is seconds, minutes maximum to where you're working. It's very difficult to get downtime. It's very difficult to have that ability to decompress. Unless you naturally have the ability to cut it all off. But the trouble is, in my experience, the vast majority of people who go into medicine, the vast majority, not all, but the vast majority, are very empathetic. And they tend to care, especially nursing, tend to care a lot about their patients. And very easy in these scenarios to get overwhelmed. Very easy. And as you can see, they hadn't done it for a long time, which is why they start out with a theorized time schedule, because they got this new equipment. Yeah, this is how we're going to run it. We're going to do 4 hours on, 4 hours off, and very quickly they try different methodologies and eventually go to 4 hours on, 8 hours off, because that's what you need to do, because they're not getting any rest. Why? Because actually the 4 hours off doesn't give them enough time to decompress and go to sleep and get some rest. So they're actually becoming functionally useless. And so you need to restructure it. These are all things which have to be relearned in many ways on the go during the Falklands War.
Everything was fairly easy, and really there was a bit of a lull, but the Galahad changed all that. I'd only seen one Burns case before, and that was an old lady who'd fallen into a fire, which was quite nasty. At 8 that morning, I'd just come off duty when I heard the call, all hands to the flying stations. I sensed immediately something was very worrying. I went straight back away to my ward to see these horrifying sights. So many burnt and disfigured men. You couldn't recognize any of them. They looked like teddy bears. Their faces were all terribly swollen, and they were in such pain. They were Chinese men as well as ordinary men, and you couldn't tell the difference. They were all black and swollen. The burnt flesh left a smell that I'd never forget. The fire had singed all their hair. The clothing they wore protected them, but their hands and faces really got it. One was burnt all over, and the only thing that was perfect was his feet. They were immaculate. I think he was going up the ladder when the blast hit the whole of his back. He came straight to us in intensive care. It was horrible. Right, all right, sight. I remember Simon Weston, who was really badly burnt, coming through with another Welsh guard. I was amazed because they were talking to each other. They were really so cheerful. It was unbelievable. I just stood there and looked at them and thought, how can you be so cheerful when you really hurt so much? He was asked how everybody was and had seen so and so, and this was because his face and had they seen so and so. And this was so much that his eyes had closed and he couldn't see. He really was so brave. He didn't often show he was in pain. Forgotten Voices of the Falklands. The real story of the Falklands War.
I have to say, again, those things are those parts of war are often forgotten. They often are forgotten. The reality of the trauma. That's why books which do touch on it are really useful. Because sometimes I find it strange because I'll be talking with people about a war, about a battle, and I can quickly work out what what draws someone into studying and researching stuff, and what level they've got to by what they're focusing on when they're talking about a battle. And usually, the tip that they have really, really focused on everything about the conflict, everything about battle, is when they start talking about the trauma recovery and the care facilities and the hospitals and those things. There are a few scenarios where that's not the case, where they are far more prominent than others. But yeah, when they start talking about that, you go, ooh, you really have done a lot of homework on this topic. Let's see where this can go. It's one of those points. It's gonna sound strange, but it's one of those points where you're sort of going, oh, I've met a fellow history geek. Oh, this is good. Not in a nasty way, sort of. It's not like people don't talk about it. You're thinking, oh, they're not really interested or anything like that. No, it's never like that. It's always sort of a sort of positive way. But that's sort of the level at which, oh, this is a history super. Well, it's more like a history super geek, not even a history geek. Super geek. Oh, wow. That means there's a good chance you might have found books I haven't. Tell me more. My Amazon and eBay list will grow. We all have our ways of sorting these things out.
Piled by Hugh McCandless. Brigadier Julian Howard Thompson, Commander 3rd Brigade, Commander Brigade. The intensity of the air attacks persuaded the Navy to sail the vulnerable merchant ships from the anchorage. Canberra should have been my dressing station, taking the wounded out to the hospital ship, Uganda. She carried 90,000 24-hour rations and most of my medical people. Instead, we had to fly the dressing station ashore to set up in the old meatpacking factory at Ajax Bay. Canberra sailing a 3rd para and 40 and 42 commander with only the equipment the men were actually carrying. The same happened on the 2nd para when the Norland was ordered to sail. So the 3,000 men now ashore had to be supplied by the logistic regiment.
One of the things Michael Clarke and I was sort of had a fun time with this was their purpose was to try and get ships out of the sound as quickly as possible and out of the high risk areas as quickly as possible. Once the Argentines especially started figuring out that their bombs hadn't been going off at the right level, this was courtesy of many sources, but of course most famously the BBC put it out. The point is, it didn't matter how they really learnt about it. The Navy starts going, right then, what can we get rid of? What things can we move? What things can we get out? Because of two reasons. One, you reduce the targets in there, but two, you also reduce the no-fire zones. Because it's going to sound strange, but if you're firing off missiles and even heavy AA guns in confined spaces, you don't want to fire them at your own ships and risk annihilating your own ship. So you have no fire areas for risk. And of course, aircraft can use this to their advantage. They can duck between ships. They can do all sorts of things, which means you stop firing. And so getting the ships out is actually, there are good reasons for doing this. Although for Julian Thompson and his logistics planners, it's a nightmare. But this was one of the issues was, despite the fact they had a lot of joined up work and they had a lot of discussions going on, you have at a certain point, for him, it's better having those ships in there. But for the Navy and sorting everything else out, it's better to get those ships out of the way.
Immediately, even though it was still offloading. Unloading all the logistics supplies took a further 5 days. The helicopters and landing craft were fully employed doing this, leaving us no means of moving out of the beachhead. Major Philip Neen, D Company Commander, 2 Para. When we got ashore and secured Sussex Mountain, there was a complete lack of medium-term objectives in their orders. We were in limbo for 4 or 5 days because nobody knew what the Argentines would do next.
Also because they're getting the logistics and supplies ashore and starting to work out where things are going to go. One of the things that happens very quickly in the Falklands War, and one of the things they realise when they get down there, is that the CVARTs, the light tanks, can move around far more freely than they realised. So they start to think, well, hang on, we should have brought more of these with us than we did. And the fact that they're there at all is because there were actually some voices from the Marines, etc., who didn't want to take them because all the soils, all the reports say the vehicles can't operate in the Falklands, and they hadn't already worked out how to integrate them. They hadn't integrated them in their force, and it's a smaller number. It's basically the Marines are debating as whether this, and the Navy goes, "We've got space. We will take them. We will take them because at worst, what we can do is we can position them around the beachhead, and they can defend the beachhead while you go yomping off if they can't do it." But yeah, you're entirely dependent on the helicopter-based logistics, and if the helicopters are moving the stuff from the ships to the shore, they're not able to move the stuff from the shore to where you need it to move forward. So you have to think about that, because you have to sort your logistics. The stuff that's coming out of the ships is not sorted into forms that the troops at the front want to receive it. It's just not. It's coming out in pallets. Pallet form. Huge amounts. They don't want a pallet of that stuff, of rations turning up in palletized. They need that to be broken down so they can receive it and they can sort it out. This takes time. And this is one of the things you get into a lot in conflicts. You sort of go, people go, "Oh, why are these forces paused here?" It's usually logistics, and it usually bottlenecks on logistics is the number of logistics enablers you have with you, i.e., the number of helicopters, the number of vehicles, the number of things you have to actually move stuff around. So this is why people like me, whenever people go on, "Oh, what matters is the number of tanks you have," and I'm sitting there going, no, if you have no tank transporters and not enough trucks to fuel them, and not enough trucks to supply them ammunition, there's no point having those tanks, because they're just going to run out of fuel, run out of ammunition, and be sitting in the wrong place, and you're not going to be able to use them for anything other than to be targets. It's logistics.
Company Sergeant Major Peter John Rickens, B Company 2 Para. For the first 10 days ashore, we didn't dry out from getting wet making the landing. Feet were a big problem. My company strength was 94. In the first week, I lost 14 men from immersion or trench foot. We wore only one pair of socks and kept the second pair under our armpits drying off during the day to wear at night.
Sounds like World War One and dealing with trench foot, and again, amphibious assaults, even ones which are to an extent not really not opposed by enemy ground forces, heavily opposed by enemy air attack, but not opposed by that. There was a small pocket of ground forces that were dealt with by special forces and helicopters quite quickly, but ground force, etc. You still get wet.
Army issue boots let the water in very badly. Private Alejandro Ramon Cano, paratrooper, Grupa Artilleria, Aerotransportat. When they informed us the English had taken the beach of San Carlos, then we knew we had lost. And that's how it goes.
If you have people thinking that, you have lost. If basically your entire battle plan had been, the British won't come, the British won't come, the British won't come, the British have come. They won't land, they won't land, they won't land. The British have landed, we've lost. You have lost. Because you've lost up here. And that matters a huge amount.
I'm not sure I agree with some of the chapter titles. The chapter titles in this book are a bit weird. Mixed messages and wishful thinking, Liberation Day, immediate action, demonstrations of serious intent, Vida en las Islas Malvinas.
Basically, I think the person... this is going to sound terrible, and it's a good book, But I think with some of the chapter titles, and this is coming from the guy who divides his videos up into parts 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. I do realize that I do the most mundane section titles for most of my videos of anyone, but they feel very artistic and not very solid, and the rest of the work does feel very solid, and so they don't really feel like they fit. Which might sound strange, but it's just my interpretation on it.
Suntans and Rifle Oil racing south. First Blood, total exclusion, sinking the Belgrano, the Argentinians strike back, softening up, landing in Bomb Alley, sacrificing pawns, London needs good news, moral domination, a brand new ship, disaster at Fitzroy Roads, getting on with it. Footsore and ruthless, night killing, firepower, a need for honor. I'm not sure about those titles, but that's it. And it is almost 15 minutes, and I do try and keep these 4 random books to 15 minutes. So thank you very much. Thank you to everyone who's watching. Thank you to everyone who's subscribed. Thank you to everyone who's pressed the little bell down below. And thank you to everyone who is a patron. As I said before, you keep me in books. Thank you. Take care.
I would add that continues. You do keep me in books. Yeah. I think the thing is I fail to keep those to 15 minutes quite regularly. I'm not very good at short videos. I keep seeing people telling me, they keep getting things from YouTube coming through going, short videos are the way to go. Short videos will make you more money. Short videos will prove this. And I'm sort of going, yeah, but I'm not good at them because I always have something else to add on. Anyway, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you found it interesting. Take care. Da 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 dee.